Okay, here's the rest of 27 finally. While Dallas and Florida went back to get their sleeping bags, Tiller and Sari packed up their breakfast things. Well, Tiller said, "How'd I do?" "You did fine," Sari said. "Only because I kept my mouth pretty much closed." "Keeps you out of trouble," Sari said. "I guess you were right," he said. "They weren't out here stealing our money, like I thought." "Of course they weren't. And I guess you were right, too, about them running away." Sari stood with her hands on her hips. "I don't know what got into them. I really don't." "Are you sure you didn't say anything to scare them off?" "I've been on my best behavior, honest," Tiller said. "I'm just glad we found them. I don't know what I'd done if we hadn't." Sari pressed her hand against the metal of her back. "Sleeping on the ground isn't so easy anymore, is it?" "Nope," Tiller said. Sari gathered up the pans. "Now look, Tiller, you be extra nice to those kids, you hear?" Tiller bowed. "Yes, ma'am, whatever you say." "I mean it." "I know you do," he said, "and I will try my best to become Mr. Personality." I'm going to see if I can do this in the next couple of minutes because YouTube won't let me upload videos that are too long. All right, Mrs. Trepid, Chapter 28. Mrs. Trepid was standing by her bedroom window, staring at two empty trash cans rolling against the curb. Clank, clank, clank. She wished someone would pick up those cans and stop that annoying noise. Clank, clank, clank. A young woman walked past, her arms swinging loosely, oblivious to the clanking trash cans. Look at her, Mrs. Trepid thought, walking along without a care in the world. She wanted to throw something at the woman, to jolt her out of her little dream world. Mrs. Trepid's gaze shifted to the porch below. It was on that same porch that the twins had first appeared in a box. She'd even seen the woman who left them. From this very window where she stood now, Mrs. Trepid had spotted the woman, bundled in a tattered and faded green dress, bending over the box. The woman had leaned down so close to the box, and then she had rushed down the walk, her hands pressed to her face. And then Morgan called up the stairs to say that it was babies in the box. 2 babies. Twins! Mrs. Trepid talked to her husband into ripping up the forms they were supposed to submit to the authorities, reporting the twins' arrival. "Let's not tell yet," she said. "Maybe these could be our babies." The more she thought about that, the more she feared that the woman in the tattered green dress would return and claim them. When Mrs. Trepid was out walking the babies in the buggy, she was always watching, terrified that the woman would appear and snatch the twins away. When people came to the home to meet the other children, Mrs. Trepid tried to keep the twins hidden. Once, when a couple saw the twins and inquired about them, Mrs. Trepid said, "They're already taken." Even as infants, Florida was the squirmy one and Dallas the quieter, dreamier one. Mrs. Trepid was intrigued by the way they clung to each other and the way they responded to each other's gurgles and the way they reached for each other when they were separated. 2 babies who came into the world at the same time. Sometimes Mrs. Trepid felt a little jealous of them. They'll always have each other. They'll always have one person who understands them completely. At first, Mrs. Trepid didn't want Morgan or Mr. Trepid to help care for the twins. She wanted to do it all herself. But she had so little patience, and always one of them needed attention, and she hated when they howled and squirmed. So much trouble, every single day. She started wishing the woman in the tattered green dress would come back and claim her twins. After one particularly trying day, Mrs. Trepid snared her husband. "File the forms," she ordered. "Tell the authorities that these twin kids just arrived and are available." To her surprise, though, people were wary of taking on twins. Twins, they'd say. Who would want to take 2 at once? Lovely idea, but no thanks. By the time the twins were toddlers, Mrs. Trepid couldn't bear their stumbling and falling and screaming and banging and breaking and spitting. Everything they did was louder and messier than what other kids did, or at least that's how it seemed to Mrs. Trepid. Now, as she stood at the window, looking down on the street, Mrs. Trepid thought about all the long years ahead. and wondered how she could live through more children and more running and spitting and banging and leaving. Clank, clank, clank. The garbage cans bashed against the curb below. Mrs. Trepid leaned out the window. "Somebody pick those up," she pleaded. "They're driving me crazy." All righty. See you next time.